Hello, everyone. Welcome along to another episode of Serie A Chronicles with me, Patrick Kendrick, alongside Mina Rizuki and Nicky Bandini. How are we getting on this wonderful late January Tuesday, everyone?
Good. Feels like it's been a real lot happening weekend in Italian football. It feels like it's been going from pretty serious stuff with the racist abuse of Mike Maignan, going into some big results on the pitch, certainly the Juventus win being a big result, going into the Supercoppa, and then hours before the Supercoppa learning that Gigi Riva had passed away. It feels like there's been a lot to keep us busy this weekend. But I also,
Nicky, you said that with such a depressed tone. I feel like now I just kind of want to cry at this point. I don't have to explain.
It's such a mix, isn't it? Like, it's such a mix this weekend. I feel like the football at times has been really, really fun. Having to write about racist abuse in a Serie A stadium is something that I feel like I've been doing almost since I started covering Serie A. So a decade and a half, more than that now. It feels like every year we have to cover these stories and nothing ever gets better, which is incredibly frustrating. And then Gigi Riva, obviously that's just a sad story as well. So I don't know, at the moment it feels like maybe the sad outweighs the good, but maybe you guys will swing me around over the course of the podcast.
I feel like Patrick got very upset by all of this and he walked out of his house now. So we've lost Patrick for a bit.
I was trying to just sort of carry on, thinking I didn't know if it'd be a long interruption, but it looks like Patrick's doorbell has gone and he's had to leave our recording.
Which I thought was quite funny because whenever I hear a doorbell and then I'm like, but I didn't hear Ross barking. So I'm like, so it's not you. So, and I know Patrick's come back with a package in his hand. So not at all dodgy. You know.
Oh, Patrick.
Hello, everyone. Sorry about that. I thought we could restart. That's my wife ordering things without my knowledge and then people ringing on the doorbell to deliver them while she's out of work in the office. What a bloody nightmare. Now I'm out of breath from dashing up the stairs. There's some nonsense beauty products as well.
I love that Simon is like nearly on the floor laughing. I feel like his wife.
Vera Lab, any good? Always. And it's never me ordering as well. And I'm always the one that
when I look up, I'll just tell you something. When I look up Vera Lab, it says face and body cosmetic products with clinically proven effectiveness.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, maybe I'll get onto this. I might tear it open and start.
Patrick, you should maybe steal it from her.
After that very rude interruption from my doorbell, I've now picked up the precious goods, some makeup for my lady wife. But there you go. It's back to the serious matter at hand, which is, of course, Italian football. Mina, I was just about to hear from you, and we didn't get the opportunity because we heard the doorbell. But how are you getting on?
Yeah, I keep saying a family bereavement, but it's not a family, but basically it's been a lot of that. So I've been watching football either on my phone, which is very hard to watch which it is. Like there's some players you can really pick out, like Teo on a pitch, right? Or like Leao. But then there are sometimes if you're watching a game and you're like, wait, who is that? Like even for example, Juventus, when I was watching this and I thought it was Vlahovic who gave the ball and then Vlahovic was the one who scored. So I was like, who is that? Oh, it's Yildiz.
He's deceptively tall, Yildiz, actually. Yeah, he's quite good in
the
air
really
as well as winning some flick-ons. But we'll get to him because he's my new favourite player in Serie A. So there we go. I'm jumping on the Yildiz.
He is a fantastic player.
Absolutely.
But and also, it's just like it's January, and I just feel like everything in January is depressing. And it just started off with like the funeral, and now it's like rain, and Nicky didn't start off with her smile, so I'm like a little bit like now I'm just starting off on an even sadder note than usual. So I'm really glad that your wife ordered some makeup because I kind of feel like that sort of cheered me up. I don't know how to explain, which begs the question: should I start ordering stuff too?
Maybe. Shout out to Vera Lab. If you do want to sponsor us, Vera Lab, then there is a window of opportunity there. But before we get into all of the stuff that we're here to talk about, which is namely Italian football, a quick reminder that you can sign up to our Chronicles Tifosi membership on Patreon with a 7-day free trial. Make sure you join the community chat in the Patreon app. And also, it would be great if you could give us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is you're listening. It helps us to be found. Right. Unfortunately,
tell everyone I'm your favorite, okay?
We need to park the sadly, we need to park all the jokes about makeup and things just for a little while, because there was another sad day in Italian football. Well, for a couple of reasons, but we'll start with the ugly side of the game, and we have to address it, of course, because it's serious. But there was a racist incident at Blue Energy Stadium, as we must now call it, in Udine, where Mike Maignan, the French goalkeeper for Milan, was subjected to racial abuse. He flagged it up to the officials once, and then the second time it happened, as per the protocol, he and his teammates went off and the match was suspended. Nicky, feels like Groundhog Day with this. I feel like we're constantly talking about racism in Italy and how to eradicate it in football, and even racism elsewhere too.
Yeah, I mean, you could say it's been Groundhog Day for even just individually Mike Maignan, because he barely arrived in Italy, and he had a situation where this happened against Juventus, and Juventus identified a fan and gave him a life ban, and here we are again 2 years later. It happened again, I think, in 2022 for Maignan, again, another game. I can't think off the top of my head which one it was. It's a never-ending story, unfortunately. And I suppose what's different this time is that you saw a whole team follow through. I've been saying that if you want to find the encouraging part of this story, I think it's how everyone reacted to it. Because I remember just, was it 5 years ago with Moise Kean and Juventus, and when he was racially abused, and Leonardo Bonucci afterwards almost two-siding it and saying, well, both parties have some responsibility, because he was sort of inferring that Moise Kean had provoked the fans in some way, and because Kean celebrated a goal by staring at those fans, acting as if that in some way justified it. Whereas I felt like the in terms of addressing these problems, it felt like everyone reacted to it in the right way, in as much as the referee stopped the game. Milan immediately supported Maignan, his teammates supported him, they all followed him down into the changing room. The stadium announcements gave the announcement and warned that if it kept happening that the match would be abandoned. You didn't see Udinese protest against it or say this shouldn't have happened. That's the positive, if I want to reach for a positive in it, but it doesn't feel like, even now, even with that reaction, we're any closer to solving it and stopping this from happening in future. Because yes, exactly as you just said, Patrick, I've been covering Serie A professionally. Obviously been watching it much longer, but I've been covering it professionally since I joined The Guardian in 2006. And I almost, well, not almost, I know there hasn't been a season in which we haven't had a story like this. Not necessarily, again, as visually dramatic, not with players walking off the pitch, but it's been a repeating situation. Not always the same stadium, not always the same players, but the fact of the abuse has never gone away.
And how do we feel about this, Mina? Like, is that the right thing to do, to go off, make a statement, then come back on? It's pretty hard to dissect in hindsight whether, I mean, Milan went on to win the game in dramatic circumstances. They would eventually go 2-1 down before coming back to win 3-2. But is there not an argument to say it would have been a more powerful statement had Milan walked off and the match had been abandoned and they'd said, we're not going to stand for this? I'm quite torn on this. I feel like Milan have been vindicated in the sense that they made a statement, they came off, and then justice was served in a footballing sense in the fact that they went on to win the match. However, I'm thinking in terms of making an even more powerful statement, is there not scope for the club to say, actually, we're not going to put up with this at all. We're packing our bags and we're going back to Milan, and we will risk any repercussions, and almost then challenging the authorities with a sort of ultimatum and saying, you know what, if you want to give it a 3-0 walkover to Udinese because technically we have abandoned the match, then be aware that there's going to be a whole load of PR that goes along with that. Where do you stand on this?
Well, I think we do need to review the protocol that everyone has agreed to. So the protocol is the fact of they read out a stadium announcement and then they say they're going to abandon the match and if it continues and all of that business, which was followed on this particular match and was followed by the referee Maresca. But I do think that it's something that we need to start having a look again, because we've seen right now what governments can do when they want to shut you down. Fascism is very real right now, and we're seeing it all around the world as to what we can really say and which groups are really protected. So if you really wanted to shut down racism, I really feel like we can. And it just needs to be just a little bit more help. There needs to be a little bit more enforcement rather than just leaving it to, and with all due respect, it's almost lucky that it happened to the Blue Energy Stadium, because Udinese have actually the equipment and the technology to view videos and to actually take action, because they own their own stadium. Had this happened in another stadium that was rented, like we've seen before, then it's much harder to track these people, and it's much harder to dish out the kind of punishments that we want. And this is another problem that we have, the bureaucracy that stops us moving into the next progressing. Everything in Italy is about relics and tradition, and it's time to move forward and be modern. And we understand that if this government wanted to truly shut this down, they can. We have seen examples of racism, unfortunately, all around Europe. And what bothered me mostly about all of this is, while I applaud Maignan for his reaction, and he was rightly complimented for the way that he handled the matter, why are we now judging players by how they respond? So what if I didn't respond in the right way when I was racially abused? You know, like what would happen then? Am I now being judged for my reaction to abuse? And this is what everyone's like, oh, well, he handled it so what? Yes, okay, I understand that, but it was almost too talked about. And this is what is really annoying, especially, for example, if you watch La Liga, where this happens so often. And Vinny Jr. is always accused, like Moise Ken was when Nicky's talking about it, for provoking, because they didn't necessarily respond in the same way that Mike Maignan did. And Mike Maignan said, oh, I came back, it's my family, and I want to play with Milan because we are a family. And they did, his teammates were so good at like caressing him and kissing him and supporting him through that. But again, I don't want to hold people to a set bar on how their reaction should be to racism and what we should applaud and shouldn't applaud. Oh, if you take it well, then you deserve for us to stand for you. But if you don't take it well, maybe you've started provoking everyone. But this is where I feel like when we talk about bureaucracy and moving on from tradition, is that we know there is an answer for this. It's that nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to put things in place. We have seen very quickly how people have been sacked from jobs over saying specific things, but you're still allowed to be rude to certain minorities or be rude in when it comes to racism or when it comes to transgender, when it comes to anything. People are still allowed to say what they want, and nobody tries to shut them down. And that is the wider problem that we have right now. We pick and choose who we protect, and we know that we can resolve this. And it's not just Serie A. It can't just fall on football. We need the government to intervene.
I think that's such an important point. I found, as you said it, Mina, I say the important point, then there's a ton of important points. I think that starting with the thought that you can't require all players to have the emotional maturity that Mike Maignan did, because Mike Maignan handled it extraordinarily. And I thought everything he said after the game, from the sort of immediately and perhaps more emotional interview right after the game to what he put out on Twitter, which I thought was all really powerful, saying, look, if you were in the fans in the stands who are with those ones doing the abuse, just because you weren't doing the abuse, you're complicit. If you're not speaking out against it, the club, you're complicit because you're just saying there was an issue and not saying what it was.
Precisely.
And I think some of that gets into the boring practical stuff, which is logistical but important, which is something that Italy continues to lag far behind on, which is stewarding inside stadiums is often absent or certainly not present in the way that we see in other countries in Europe. Because one of the things that, not that the Premier League is perfect by any stretch, these things have been getting worse in recent years, but what you see in a lot of Premier League stadiums is very visible campaigns where if you don't feel brave enough to confront someone individually, you can text a number and stewards are going to handle it because they're going to have a seat number, they're going to know where to go and deal with it, and that sort of stuff is not as easy in a poorly stewarded stadium. Now, as you said, Blue Energy Stadium actually is one of the more advanced and modern and in many regards better for dealing with this sort of thing. But that's the logistical side of it. The side of how you punish it, to come back to what Patrick said, to me, this thing of, because Gianni Infantino raised this, right, the president of FIFA, saying, oh, well, the game should be immediately abandoned and awarded as a defeat. To me, that's, and people can disagree with me on this, to me, that's not the right answer for it. The answer is not come up with a harsher and harsher punishment, because frankly, that sort of level leaves it open to, I think, manipulation, to people being cute and pretending they're supporting one team and making that sort of fuss. I think that leads to more mess. The answer is not greater and greater punishment. The answer is consistent application. The answer is it shouldn't take Mike Maignan walking off the pitch for this to be dealt with. It should have taken the first time he heard it at a goal kick and raised it with someone. Someone should have been on it. There should have been stewards going to that section and going, this stops right now and you're going out. It shouldn't get to that point. So it's not punishment, it's application, it's enforcement. And that's the thing that I always come back to. But as Mina says, and this is, I thought, really the most fundamental point that's the hardest to address, football is downwind of culture, and all of this stuff is being empowered at a level that goes beyond football right now, and that's the hardest bit for football to address.
Absolutely, and there have been some repercussions to this. That one of the individuals has been identified and has been given a life ban. And just breaking now news that there will be one match played behind closed doors in Udine, which again feels like just papering over the cracks, really. And I'm not sure how much that's going to resolve. And you're absolutely right, both of you, about Maignan reacting in a very lucid way. There's no guarantee of that. We saw it 5 or 6 years ago now with Kalidou Koulibaly, who was sent off in a game against Inter. Mm-hmm. But he then came out and said, I'd been subjected to racist abuse. I was on edge, and therefore that affected my game. I was a little bit more frenetic and frantic and went charging into challenges. And I think there's definitely something to be said for that. You cannot gauge.
Balotelli kicked a ball at a fan once. Was it a Verona game? And I think on that occasion, the referee initially sent him off and then actually revoked it after speaking to everyone.
Yeah. Lukaku. I mean, he was. Do you remember when? Yeah. Lukaku against Juventus when that whole thing happened, and then he got a yellow card. Do you remember for doing this? I mean, however you react is however you want to react.
He was sent off, wasn't he? He was suspended then for the second leg of that Coppa Italia thing, and I think it was eventually overturned because
by the government, by the senior people. So you can.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's the point: is that they can do something about this, and they choose not to, or it's not something. Listen, with this whole thing, it's because the ultras weaponize everything. That's the problem that we have with giving like an immediate forfeit. And that's the one thing that's being discussed, or at least where I've seen written in social media, is that, if we do shut it down and immediately award 3-0, it's very easy to have these, like Nicky said, people just come in and then just doing it to make sure that their teams keep losing, like the opposition. So we have to figure out a way of doing this. And it does start with better stadiums and better technology to be able to find stuff out. It's not more fascism. I'm not saying like, we need to now start like watching every single person. That there were suggestions of people actually writing down who they're affiliated to, which club, so that we know if we do an immediate forfeit that person belongs to this group. So if it's not more, it's not more invasions of privacy that's the answer to this. It is just moving technology wise so that we are able to spot this, and we are able to move into the next era of this world and football, and understand that it is a business, and understand that there is going to be always attacks on the business and attacks on the integrity of the sport that must be dealt with. And it's so frustrating when it's constantly, how some people are spoken to, where Vinny Jr. gets this every day and nobody really cares because Vinny Jr. is seen as a provocative player and Maignan is seen as a leader. And this is what really annoys me. There's also a difference in age, difference in position, these things are never taken into account. An 18-year-old is never going to react the same as a 26-year-old, or, and so on and so forth. And you don't need to react however you want. You react however you want to react. So I'm not here to police that. And I do feel like we often seem to show a lot more sympathy and a lot more conversations when it happens to a higher profile player, a Milan player, for example, than it would be if it was a different Salernitana player. And I'm especially surprised that it was in Udine that this would happen, because this is a club that is famous for integration, and it is famous in the city as well for being on the borders of Slovenia and Austria and having the most amount of foreigners playing in this particular club. So the whole thing is so bewildering for me.
But that's one supporter who doesn't necessarily represent or reflect the club and the region's identity and their values. I think, as you said, Nicky, I think it's great if there are tangible consequences. I think if there is this zero tolerance approach where that if you do subject a player to racist abuse, that immediately someone is going to come by and you're going to be ejected and given a life ban, then therefore there is...
Not afterwards, then and there.
Yes,
like
then and there. And we also need to get past this culture of omerta, the code of silence, and people need to actually step up and draw the steward's attention to. I appreciate what you're saying about, there are ways within the Premier League where you can sort of communicate this without fear of reprisals. But I think we also need to try and make these people into pariahs and actually just say, this guy's a disgrace. I don't want to be associated with him. I don't want to stand near him. He is abusing someone. It's reflecting badly on the club as a whole. I think there needs to be more of a collaborative approach to actually out.
Didn't that happen though? Because I thought that they was somebody had filmed this, realizing that it was obviously like they were making racist remarks. They used that film to try to identify. And from what I understood, the FA, the Italian FA, had 2 people, representatives, sent over to that side behind to the goal to see what was going on after they heard the initial. After Maignan talked to the referee, they sent 2 FA representatives to see what was going on. So I did think that something like that was done, which I haven't seen done before. So correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I had written. Well, that was what was written in Gazzetta. So I don't know, but at least I thought, okay, so finally, at least there's representatives who will then be sent to see what's going on. And they said afterwards it subsequently stopped happening. And that's why the game continued. But I don't, now I'm starting to question myself. I don't know.
I think absolutely. I think if that can then become the norm and people are empowered to be able to actually say this is going on, I don't think it's acceptable. But, how quickly does that communication come about? That's the thing. If someone needs to film it and then send it or show the footage, whereas if you have more attentive stewards who are actually looking and listening out for this, then maybe you give them the license to be able to say, actually, that's not acceptable. I'm going to eject you. But I think it is a topic that we could debate for hours, and we've recently been doing deep dives on a number of issues. So there's definitely scope to talk about this in greater detail going forward. I'm conscious of just how much went on over the course of this weekend, and we have a new league leader in Serie A. Mina, Juventus are top
Should
of
we just
the
quickly,
league.
before we do that, just talk about the end of that game though, because it was actually a great win for Milan. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
Absolutely,
but I don't
and it's
the
substitutes doing it again, Nicky. Yeah, Luka Jovic and Noah Okafor back from injury.
Yeah, but I mean, as a narrative, that the end of the story is great for Milan because they were playing well in that game. They were dominating it. The match gets interrupted. They came back. Clearly, focus had shifted a bit. Udinese get on top, and then yes, the 2 unloved signings of the summer, Jovic and Okafor, coming off the bench to score goals. Milan have taken 16 points from 6 games. This sort of, just to remind everyone, in Camp Pioli out, this team is doing really well. And that sort of whole story of December and we need to sack him right now, to me just looks very silly at this point.
And of all those signings, if you think about it, the ones that have underwhelmed are probably the minority as opposed to the majority. I think we could say Yunus Musa is still the one where the jury's out on that, and Samuel Chukwueze has obviously been in and out with injuries. A couple of important goals, albeit in the Champions League, they didn't count for much with Milan dropping into the Europa League. He is now away with the AFCON. But besides that, if you look at Pulisic, you look at Loftus-Cheek, you look at now Okafor comes in and is taking opportunities. They've certainly recruited well, haven't they?
Yeah, and even Luka Jovic, who was brought in the last day of the transfer market and only given a 1-year contract, he's now scoring goals more often than I would have ever imagined. I believe it's every 117 minutes from, all the minutes that he had. But ever since he started scoring, it's a lot more frequent than that. So he certainly found his scoring boots. But I also think that I do a little bit find it ridiculous in Italy how we have such highs and such lows, that there's become no ability to really sort of properly analyze things in a calm manner. And of course I understand that because football is full of hyperboles. But I sort of went from crisis and Pioli must be sacked to they are in the title race. And if one of them just drops a point, then Milan's going to win it. And I'm like, what? I honestly, it was all about how Pioli is in the title race with Milan. And I was like, title race? A few years, you were worried they were going to be in the relegation points. And now you're talking about how, the end of a cycle and this is a disaster and they're out of the Champions League and out of the Coppa Italia. And what is this? And the pressure of both of these, Roma and Milan, going into that match because, both of these coaches were under pressure and what was this going to mean to them, to 1 week later they're back in the title race and maybe can overcome Inter. I do find this then the nightmare, the paradise hell sort of madness of it all is a little bit crazy. And now it's like, oh, and look at Pioli's tactics in Roma. Look how he understands the team. Look at the emergence of Gabbia at the back and how important he was. And explain. I do find this really ridiculous, but I sort of, I've always been in Pioli's camp. I'm a big fan of Pioli. I sort of get really upset when people don't like him. To me, he's almost as much as I love him as much as I almost love Allegri, and I do feel that he has made his mistakes, and I think that's important to note. But I also think people having expected Milan to start off so beautifully with an entirely different management, a new ownership, 10 new players that he had to integrate, an entire new midfield because Benacer was injured, Tonali had left, and they were already reeling last year from the absence of Frank Kessié. I do feel like people just don't recognize the importance of things like that anymore, of how continuity matters and how it's hard to find that again. And when you look at where Milan now have more points than Inter had last season at this stage of the season, and nobody recognizes. They actually have more points than when Inter, who reached the Champions League final, who are referred to as the best club in Italy and the best club nearly in Europe. And Milan has more points at this point with everything that they've been through than what Inter managed last year when they were in second place behind Napoli. And I think and they have 7 more points at this stage than they had last year at this stage. And I don't feel like this is getting recognized, that despite all the changes, despite losing Maldini and Massara and Tonali and Ibrahimovic, or whatever you want, they've got him back now, but all of these changes, it is remarkable to me that they have found their feet. And maybe it won't last, but even if it doesn't, I understand it. I genuinely understand it. And I don't think that that's respected by the media. It's constant up, down, sacked, not sacked. And we have to try to change this somehow. I don't know.
There's only one team that can win the league every season. I think you're absolutely right. And Milan are having a good season. And I think if you consider they won 7 of their first 8 matches, the problem was the one that they lost was a 5-1 defeat in the derby. And I think too often we look at Pioli through the prism of his record in the derbies. Too often, I think he won that Scudetto, so then expectations were further raised and he's not been able to repeat it. But this is a coach who will again guide Milan into the top 4. I think there's no doubts about that anymore. And maybe, just maybe, if Juventus were to drop points at home to Empoli, which would appear surprising, and if Inter were to lose at Fiorentina this coming weekend, and then if they draw against each other in the Derby d'Italia, you couple that with a couple of Milan wins, suddenly they're right back in it. But I think a lot of things would have to come to pass. If it were just one team ahead of Milan, I think you could probably say they might still be able to work their way into the title race. I think to try and get above 2, particularly with Juventus, the Coppa Italia notwithstanding, having just one match a week, absolutely, they've still got to come up against Rennes as well in the Europa League. That will soon come around next month. So Milan with another win, as you said, Nicky. Their recent record has been very good. No, absolutely. I think it was. You're absolutely right. I was conscious of. I think I was doing the opposite of Gabriele Cioffi, who only wanted to speak about football, and then you forget that by speaking about racism, there's still a football match that was there, and Milan showed great character to actually bounce back from that abhorrent incident to then go on and win the game. And another team that won was Juventus. Back-to-back 3-0 wins, back-to-back Vlahovic braces, 2 victories by the same scoreline in the space of 5 days. Sassuolo at home, Lecce away, no real jeopardy again. Never really looked like conceding in either match. Despite an underwhelming first half at the Via del Mare, they got the job done. Operazione Sorpasso, as it is being called, Operation Leapfrog, mission accomplished. And suddenly, if they beat Empoli this coming weekend, they'll go 4 points clear at the top, ahead of Inter's game away at Fiorentina. And even if Inter win that, they would then start the Derby d'Italia in second spot. There's a psychological element to this, isn't there? Especially, and that's actually something that one of our patrons has touched upon. We've got Giancarlo Anese, who says, whose mentality do you think Juventus provisionally taking first helps more, Inter or Juventus? Is it better for Inter to be chasing or fending Juventus off? And for Juventus, which do you think it was better? So we're talking about the, what is it? It's the cops and the robbers, isn't it? It's the ladri and the guardia that Allegri's. We've had all sorts of bizarre mixed metaphors, haven't we? We've had Inter have been the hare dashing away. That was Marotta. Then we've had the cops and the robbers. We've had the horse with the blinkers on. It's all getting a little bit muddled with the metaphors. I don't know who's doing what to whom anymore.
Can I ask why that was so controversial? What was it, because he's referring to them as thieves, and that was why everyone was so angry?
It was probably the connotation of theft in Italian football related to Juventus, and something about pots and kettles and things like that. I assume that's my take as a neutral Englishman with a smattering of understanding of Italian football culture and language. But there we go. I'll leave it in the capable hands of Nicky Fandini on that one. I'm not touching that.
I think that's a fair thing to infer about that phrasing and why it would be inflammatory. Whether it was intended to be inflammatory, you can have
it was.
open,
it's Allegri. He knows exactly what he's doing.
I'm inclined to think that Allegri knows.
So?
I think he's the best communicator in the league. I think he's not a single word or syllable is wasted. It's just it's a joy to watch.
I
his
love
press
that man
conferences.
so much. I just love
Another Allegri loving coming in, right? We've talked about him as a communicator. What about him as a tactician? Because it feels like only a few short weeks / months ago, everyone was saying he was a tactical dinosaur, that he's irrelevant. He was being tarred with the same brush as the former Roma boss, who we shall not name. And yet Allegri continues to surprise people now. Should we be surprised that someone who won 5 straight league titles with Juventus, 6 all told if you include his Scudetto with Milan, is now competing again for the Italian domestic title, playing 1 game a week?
I think this is like such a consistent theme through Allegri's best years at Juventus, through those runs to the Champions League final. His teams come together during the season. All of those seasons, when you look back on them, if anything, I'd say there's been less of a sort of clear sort of tactical shift this season, but there's still a shift of emphasis. There's still a shift in terms of how you're playing, and I think the shift of emphasis is pretty clear from the start of this year. There's been, 18 goals scored in 6 Juventus games so far this season. This is not this calendar year. This is not cortomuso anymore. This is, we're going to play our football and we're going to go after you. Now, yes, worth saying, the fixture list to start this year has not been the most daunting. There are sterner challenges ahead, including a Derby d'Italia not far on the horizon, and we'll see how that game is approached compared to these ones. But the unleashing of Yildiz, which I know Mina has already talked about on the podcast and is not going to stop talking about it on the podcast anytime soon, I don't imagine, with how well he's playing, is clearly a big factor in it. I think that having... it's funny because I was just writing about this morning. I'm sure we'll talk about this in a minute as well, but I was writing about, with the Supercoppa, the impact of Thuram on Lautaro and how important it is to have a proper foil. And yes, Yildiz feels like the right foil to Vlahovic. And I think it's one of those things that perhaps hasn't been talked about enough in our analysis of Vlahovic at Juventus, because we've talked plenty about his imperfections as a player, and he does have those imperfections. But he has come from such a different system at Fiorentina under Vincenzo Italiano at a time when they were really playing very attacking football, to being in a system where very often at Juventus it's been like, you're the guy up front, do it on your own. And every player has a different setting in which they are going to feel most at ease, most able to do things. He's playing really well. His second goal was an absolute robbery from poor Weston McKennie, who
he hasn't scored all season, by the way.
And who's playing really well. I mean, I have to say that I think Weston McKennie is playing so well.
The Americans have dubbed him the American Pirlo. How do we feel about
that? Oh, God, no.
I think that one's maybe reaching a little bit, but...
He's playing like prime Pirlo. Yeah. There you go.
He has no technique. Like, how?
Which is the Italian Pirlo. Sorry, but because I interviewed him recently, and he was very big on it's the team that matters, team results. I'm no longer worried about what position I play and all this stuff. And I believe him, but you could see the moment that ball was going in, he was ready to celebrate. And he's like, sees Vlahovic get that catch on it. And you can see he's a little bit like, oh, that was mine.
It was perfect for a body language expert, wasn't it? Him with the sort of wry smile and sort of gritted teeth, and then Vlahovic completely unapologetic and just like, so. And then naturally, when you think about it, there's also a financial element to this as well, because players get goal bonuses. McKennie hasn't scored all season.
I'm sure
yeah.
I'm sure
when you interviewed him, did you grill him, pun intended, on his culinary preferences, or did you leave that to one side?
No, we definitely talked about that. Yes. The interviews on I think it might be on the website, but it's 8x8 magazine. It certainly has been tweeted and things, because I think Weston McKennie even gave it a repost on Instagram, which got lots of buzz. I think the whole article might be online. So
We'll put a link to
have
it
a
in the
look out
show
for that,
notes.
if not 8x8 mag. But yes, we did talk about food crimes, because he was talking about the ranch dressing thing. He gave me a couple of funny lines. First of all, so he has a private chef who cooks for him, and he was saying, because he and Moise Keane are close, but also obviously him and Tim Weah being the two Americans, and saying they often hang out together. And he has private chef Patrick, who does his cooking after games, and his private chef Patrick has a cousin who has a restaurant in Turin, and there is a bottle of ranch dressing in the fridge of that restaurant, kept there in the back specifically for Weston McKennie when he goes. So he continues to do that. He was saying as well about putting chicken on his pasta with pesto, and the outrage that caused the Italians, but in his opinion all the non-Italians agree with him. So yeah, we did talk food crimes, we talked fashion crimes. It was a lot of fun.
Fabulous.
I mean, I'm going to agree with him here. I like chicken in my pasta. So, and I'm not going to lie, I love ranch dressing. Like, the more the merrier. I will shove it everywhere. I'm not one of those purists.
I actually like ranch dressing as well. But ranch dressing, see, you don't put it on an Italian pizza. You put it on an American pizza. And those are two different things.
Yeah.
And I think they both have their place in the world. But,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that one thing that you notice also when Allegri speaks about McKennie is how he starts to smile. So, there seems to be this, he has a weird affection for McKennie. He seems to really like him. And when they asked him about his goal, and he's he's scared of taking planes. He takes the train everywhere. Right? And he sort of feels like he's a boy who comes into the dressing room and lifts the atmosphere. And I think that he really appreciates that about him. And you notice that he's also quite defensive of Moise Keane too. So I feel like I always feel like I don't know how to say Moise Keane, or
he doesn't know himself.
Because he switches back.
It was Ken, and he went to England and said it was Moise Keane. So I don't know which of those was correct.
So I keep switching it every time just so I could cover all bases. But yes, and he seems to sort of feel like these types of players are really important for the dressing room, just to make it a better atmosphere. And it's almost like Pinsoglio, he likes different characters within his team dressing room because he thinks it's sort of changing things. But he's been really loyal to McKennie. I mean, he's always being played in midfield. And what I really appreciate is that it's something Carlo Ancelotti, I feel like he's somebody where every time he talks, I write it down, because I'm always like, this is going to be important later, because he just understands the game so well and characters so well. And he always talks about being either a realist or an optimist as a football player. And so, for example, he always describes like Nacho in the defense of Madrid as a realist. So he's always wondering when they're going to score against him. And then you've got people like sort of Ramos, who was he said an optimist, a player who always thought he was going to score and he was going to just light it up, and how you have to align these types of things. And you have that as coaches too, because Allegri is very much a realist. So he sets up his team for the first 4 or 5 months to be teams that it just defend at this point, and then we'll always find a goal, but just make sure that we get this down. Make sure that I sort of shield you, the weaknesses that you have. I work around them. So, for example, McKennie is no one ever passes him the ball when he is surrounded, because he can't get out of tight spaces. It's about, it's like, I'll use you for your energy, your ability to cross, your ability to, see he has good vision, actually, McKennie, but not his technique is not something that you would really write home about. What he has missed is a player who's really good on the ball. And I think that he's found that in Yildiz. And it's exactly like you said, bringing him closer to Dusan Vlahovic, who has a lot of ability. But it's starting to make me think twice about Chiesa. Like, I love Chiesa, I really do. And I know that he's often spoken about as the best Italian that we have, right? And while he is this magnificent player, he is an individualist. He is a solo player. He wants to do things on his own. He wants to resolve situations on his own. And this is his downfall. He plays with his head down for so often. And I go back to it. This is why he wasn't the guy that Mancini relied on from the first minute. He would be a sub player who'd come on, counterattack, get a goal, do something, because he's that guy. And I wonder whether that is conducive to an attacking pattern of play that involves everyone. And I wonder whether he's just somebody who almost acts on his own, as opposed to somebody who can really work within a team and lift it together the way that Yildiz can, because that him being so close to Vlahovic, the way that he plays, his give and goes, his understanding of space, his ability on his feet, it makes life so much easier for Vlahovic, who does need that, And so it is about finding. So this is how I think Allegri starts it off. It's like, okay, let's measure the weaknesses. Let's try to shield the weaknesses. And then when I know you guys so well, I'm going to start exposing your strengths. I'm going to try to make sure that I now show off or find out how I can bring out the best of what you have to offer. And now we start to see the players really, really lighting it up. But Cambiaso, I just want to talk about his tactical intelligence. Like, I really felt that Juve lost something with Marchisio, like a youngster who was Juve through and through, who could play in different roles, who was tactically smart. But Cambiaso has played so little. I mean, this is his first season, and he's so clever. And I'm almost amazed how much he understands all these different positions and how to move and how to occupy space and how to always be there at the right time, making the right decisions. Even the growth of Miretti, I'm almost surprised by all of it, and I don't understand how in any way, shape, or form people seem to. And I buy into it, by the way, because even I listen to what everyone says about Allegri and all the hashtags out, and then I'm like, maybe I'm always just supporting this guy, and maybe I need to rise up to the fact that he is a dinosaur. And then he does this, and I'm like, oh, I knew it. I love this man for a reason, But it is a fantastic job, and it's a different team right now, because it's not a team that scores 1-0 and is scared and is defending with its life on the line. It is a team that feels more comfortable getting more goals, that's more capable of scoring more goals, and there's been a shift in mentality. And that's one thing Sarri always said that he was always jealous of Juventus for when he was at Napoli. He said they have this mentality where they believe in themselves. They can win a game in 10 minutes. They don't need to play a full brilliance like 90 minutes that other teams can manage. They don't need to give you 10 minutes. They've won the game.
And I think we're seeing with Allegri as well that for all the time that he's been criticised in the past, he's often said players need to go down to Serie B, or I think that's certainly helped with having the next gen side as well, playing in the third tier. He's often said that young players aren't ready to go straight into Serie A football, but his timing with Yildiz has been outrageously good. He's absolutely nailed it. This is a player who didn't get his full Juventus debut until that game against Frosinone away. And if you now look at their record since then, it's absolutely night and day. I mean, they won 2-1 in that game. He scored 11 minutes into his debut. Then they beat Roma narrowly. But since then, 6-1 against Salernitana in the Cup, 2-1 with that late Vlahovic winner in Salerno. And then since then, 4-0, 3-0, 3-0 against Frosinone, Sassuolo and Lecce, respectively. You will obviously qualify that by saying they're all teams in the bottom half of the table. But that is now 10 goals in their last 3 games without conceding. And I think what Yildiz offers is that he's able to commit opponents, create an overload, and suddenly Juventus are a little less static. And they're able to get the opposition running back towards their own goal. It frees up Vlahovic, who maybe doesn't necessarily have that searing pace in behind, who's not necessarily the best with his back to goal. And we're just seeing Yildiz's role in that first goal was all important. So Juventus transition, he controls the ball with the outside of his boot in the air, gets the shot away, the keeper spills it, Cambiaso then knocks it back in, and Vlahovic mishits a volley into the ground. It goes into the corner. It's one of those where everything is working out for Juventus at the moment. I would liken it a little bit to Inter. Di Marco just flicks the ball, hopefully, in the second semi-final of the Supercoppa, but it drops to Thuram's feet.
I thought you were coming back to that golf in the halfway line again.
No. Well, we can talk about that. Actually. We just produced the highlight show from this weekend, and because there are only 6 matches, we did a best goal of the season so far, and there are 11 goals in there, and one of them was Di Marco against Frosinone, and I was very torn to include it because there's a camera angle that shows him off balance falling over towards the touchline, then sheepishly running over, and then like, oh, actually, I better claim this goal, so I'm going to do my cringe sort of celebration, which I can't abide. Anyway, moving swiftly on. Right, so Juventus are now top of the table, and Juventus are sticking with Allegri, year 3 of 4. But Roma have a new coach, club legend.
Well, just quickly, just very quickly, because we didn't answer that question at all from poor Giancarlo Anese.
I mean, Mina went on a loving about McKennie and Allegri and etc. So,
wait, what was this question? Sorry.
The question was: is it better for Inter to be chasing, or is it better to be in first place? And I think I'm always points on the board. Points on the board is always better than having that game in hand.
Yeah, I think Inter are better as a team that leads, and I think Juventus like to follow. Also because there's less pressure on Juventus to actually win it. So I think that I honestly don't know. Barcelona, for example, are a team that always has to lead. They don't know how to chase, but Madrid only know how to chase. They almost don't know how to lead. So but for Juventus and Inter, it's entirely different. So I don't really know how to pin that properly. But can I just ask a quick question, guys? Where would you put Chiesa in this team? I'm starting to worry that I can't find a position for him anymore.
I think in this 3-5-2 shape, with the way Yildiz is playing alongside Vlahovic, I mean, Vlahovic is your big money signing. You're finally seeing the best of him. He's now got 11 goals in the league. He's got 4 in his last 2 matches. Yildiz is
it's more than Lukaku, who they wanted.
Exactly. Yildiz is getting the best out of him. And it's a strange one, because since Yildiz has come into the side, I mean, Milik scored a hat-trick alongside him in the Cup. Vlahovic is scoring all of these goals. Yildiz himself has scored in both rounds of the Cup, also scored in his full debut against Frosinone. And this has coincided with Chiesa missing 4 of the last 7 games that Yildiz has been playing in with injury. And Yildiz has started 6 of those 7, I think 5 in a row. And it's a tricky one, because it feels like it's been a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B, in the sense that how much of this is down to Yildiz being picked on merit and how much of it is down to the fact that Chiesa's been out of the side with injury. And I feel like if Chiesa were fit again, there's no guarantee he'd necessarily start, because the team is actually playing better as a unit without him, with Yildiz coming in as opposed to Chiesa. And maybe there's also that thing that we saw last season with Kvaratskhelia at Napoli, in the sense that opposition defenders don't have a large enough sample size of Yildiz to know how to deal with him, whereas with Chiesa, who can be absolutely devastating, but there is a certain way of defending him. We've seen that in the past.
So, producer Simon, we have the title of the pod, which is Patrick says we need to sell Chiesa.
I said nothing of the sort. I said he could be dropped. When he's fit again, he should rot on the bench. That's what I said. Federico Chiesa. I'm not even sure he should make the Italy squad for Euro 2024. No, there's your head. No, I'm being facetious. Yeah. Daniele De Rossi. Before.
Yes, yeah.
What do we think? Yes, no, short term, long term?
Yes, it's game one.
It's an Hellas Verona side that's like solved its entire team. So I'm almost amazed that they were actually quite good despite that. Like, they actually really produced a performance in the second half, in all honesty, I mean, Juric, who can we just talk about that penalty? Have you ever seen a bit like what happened with that penalty?
Happens to the best of them.
That's
Ballon
one
d'Or,
thing.
Roberto Baggio, Pasadena.
Yeah, but
Juric and Roberto Baggio in the same sentence.
I mean, I would never think that that's spoken about. But I always feel sorry for Juric, because the way that he sometimes approaches the referee, he just has this way about him where he seems a bit soft. I don't know, for such a tall man. Regardless of all of this, I mean, selling Ngonge and Doi, I just think that, what are you doing? Because you're really trying. And also the high line. Well. What were you thinking? The high line in the first half, are you crazy? But it is the way they play. It is what Baroni wants. So I guess whatever. I mean, in the second half, they produced a performance. It's a much more dynamic Roma side, which was fun to watch. It wasn't a Roma side that was entirely dependent on what Dybala can do. It was a dynamic team that ran forward and that were looking for their opportunities. Going forward, though, I really don't know how to judge, because this is a fairly easy game for them. Well, it should have been a fairly easy game for them.
And Cristante Mancini was suspended. He went to a Christmas tree. Whether he then reverts back to a back three when Mancini comes back into the side remains to be seen. But I like the symbolism of it all. I'm a bit of a romantic. I loved Pellegrini scoring when he's been a bit underwhelming under Mourinho. He has been held back by injuries, and immediately pointing to the badge, and there's that whole De Rossi, Pellegrini, Romano, Romanista thing, these Roma fans who've come through the academy. I don't know how much De Rossi can tap into that. There's a few of them in the squad. There's Zalewski and Bove. We've seen all those debutants.
But they were all booed. This is what really bothers me, is everyone was booed, barring De Rossi.
I mean,
they blame them for Mourinho's sacking. And I'm like, okay, like, this is just crazy to me.
The fan base need to move on. I think there's Mourinho is very good at getting everyone to club together. And I know that the club did feel more, certainly the sections of the fan base felt that the club was more relevant than ever when Mourinho was there. But I think we've debated it at length for all the European finals. There was a lot of turgid football that went along with it. And I think I'd just like to see Roma play with a bit of freedom now and no real expectations on them going forward. There will be stronger tests to come. I know they've got Inter coming up at home, and that'll be interesting to see how De Rossi does against Inter. And it'll be nice to actually have a Roma press conference ahead of an Inter game as well. We didn't have any of those when Mourinho was in charge.
Yeah, it's really like to take anything from one game, and especially as Mina said, a team in the state that Verona are in is reading probably too much. But it was interesting listening to De Rossi and his sort of take on it, saying you've got to play with the ball, you've got to keep playing, you can't sort of stop playing, and that was the thing. Sometimes it felt like watching Roma under Mourinho, it felt like they were setting out to not play. So it's a different direction. Whether or not De Rossi is able to deliver something, who knows? I mean, we talked about all the reservations we have about him as a coach last week, and you're not going to flush that away by beating Verona slightly unconvincingly 2-1 at
One
home.
man who did deliver was another new coach, Davide Nicola, the survival specialist. He of the Great Escape,
that was so scary.
Crotone, Genoa, Salernitana, might be Empoli now. Szymon Żurkowski scored 4 goals in 2 games since going back to Empoli on loan. And amazingly...
But Patrick, why?
Why?
Well, who was the team they were playing?
That's a bit harsh to Monza. Can we not talk about Empoli rather than immediately referring it back to Monza and how much you hate Monza? I think I was amazed that this Żurkowski was the first ever Polish hat-trick in Serie A. And I think when you think we had Piontek in Serie A. I think he scored 4 in the Coppa Italia, didn't he, on his debut against Lecce. We had Milik score a hat-trick only a couple of weeks ago in the Coppa Italia. But apparently it was the first ever Polish hat-trick in Serie A. So Zibi Boniek, there you
incredible.
go. How about that? It's Szymon Żurkowski. That's one for the quiz question in future times. And it was a perfect
great stat. Yeah.
It was
left foot, right foot, head.
Absolutely. I think in order it was left-footed volley, header, and then a right-footed finish. So Żurkowski, and his wife is pregnant as well. So lots of celebrations in the Żurkowski family. So and Empoli next. Go away to Juventus.
It worries
you. Is that what worries you?
Yeah. Now I'm like, oh my God, we've got Davide Nicola. When like Empoli was like the team that you guaranteed and I'm like, what a horrible time, to get Empoli now that they like scored 3 goals and Żurkowski has like found himself. And Nicola is a coach that I really adore. I think he's, obviously he's a specialist, especially when it comes to relegation dogfights. And I like Empoli. I've always really liked Empoli. They managed only 5 goals away from home. Sorry, I'm struggling. Is it at home or away from home? They've really suffered. They're lowest scoring team in the league. So I was really amazed by this performance. I really was. I mean, I will go back to Monza or pants, but I am amazed by Empoli's like progression. And I'm scared. I'm genuinely scared to face them now.
Oh, come on. I mean, the way Juventus are playing, it should be a comfortable home win, but it would be a hilarious twist to this title race if all the talk about Inter potentially losing at Fiorentina with Barella and Çalhanoğlu suspended, it was Juventus losing at home. It would be for the first time this season as well to a lowly Empoli side, despite that win still down in penultimate place in the table. We touched upon the Super Cup extensively in our voice notes. Have we learned anything new from those 3 matches that we saw in Riyadh beyond the fact that Inter are much better as a team this season than Napoli, Lazio and Fiorentina?
Yeah, it's unfortunately I didn't get to hear your voice note yet, so I don't know if I'm recovering things you've already said, Patrick, but I think we definitely learned some new things. We learned, I think, that this back 3 for Napoli is going to change the dynamic, and I'm really interested to see if they can maintain some of the improvement I felt like we saw in 2 games in Riyadh. I thought they were obviously great in the 3-0 win over Fiorentina. I thought they were also really impressive on 11 players against Inter. They weren't dominating that game by any stretch, but they certainly seemed to have neutralised Inter quite effectively and looked like they were ready to start pushing on a bit in the second half. They had their one good chance from Kvaratskhelia at the second half. So that's something new we learned. To an extent, we learned less new about Inter. Inter win the Supercoppa. It's what they do every year since Inzaghi got there. Lautaro scores and they win. That's how that works. I thought it was unsurprising that it was him who got the goal in the end. Marcus Thuram looked like perhaps just a little bit of that lack of finals experience, tripped up over his feet a couple of times when he could have scored in the second half. But Lautaro has been there, done it makes no mistakes. And I thought that other than that, the big questions are the ones that we don't know yet. Will this galvanise them because it's a trophy, or will it tire them out because it's a trip to play 2 extra games at a point in the season where things are about to accelerate, when you're about to go and play the Derby d'Italia, but you also have the game against Fiorentina first away from home, for which Barella is now suspended because of this game, and then you've got Europe looming. Which way does that play for Inter? Is it an advantage to have got the win and feel good about yourself, or is it a negative to have the tired legs coming back?
I think it has to be an advantage.
I feel like... Do you think so? Yeah, it should be an advantage because it galvanizes you. And here's the thing about Inter, like, they are definitely far and away the best team in Serie A, and they certainly have the best talents. But I was kind of a little bit struck by...
it's less far and away than I used to. I think Juventus are closer and closer. Yeah,
they are a lot better. It's just that with Juventus, you see, this is the question that I have. The only thing that I've spotted about Inter, which I can't speak about Juventus because they haven't had the same problem, right, is that Inter, when they do play every 3 games, you'll notice that they start making a lot more mistakes. And it is, they start squandering a lot more chances. They start making silly mistakes. And I thought actually in this particular match, like, Napoli, I could see a start to a plan. I understood what they were trying to do, and obviously that it didn't help that they got the red card and that was sent off. And it's the sort of mistakes that they do make into that makes me feel that when it starts to get busy, and it's starting to get busy, I mean, we're talking about Fiorentina, Juventus, Roma. I mean, Roma might be easy, but or it might be very difficult. And then Salernitana, which is the easy one, and then Atletico Madrid. And then we have Atalanta, Genoa, Bologna, Atletico Madrid, Napoli. And I just kind of feel like it's... What a little bit upsets me with all of this is that you can see some of the players are like struggling, you know, whether it's they're on a yellow card or whatever it was, like with Barella, for example. But there's never an opportunity for like Aslani. There's never an opportunity to bring in the squad depth and make sure that it rises to the occasion in certain matches. And so they depend a lot on their starting 11. And when that starting 11 plays very often, you start seeing mistakes happen. And I worry in that level that the mistakes might come far more frequently as it gets busier and busier, which it has already become. So this is it was a very different performance against Napoli to what we saw against Lazio. And against Lazio, it was that the strength. I mean, that also has a lot to do with Sarri telling his team that they're never going to win this match anyway. So obviously there is a psychological downfall of all of this. But it is also, it's weird with Inter. Sometimes you see this performance where it's so much strength when everyone is just understands everything that they're doing. And then you see the best of Çalhanoğlu, you see the best of Barella, and obviously you always see the best of Lautaro. To sometimes a few days later where Thuram is missing 2 clear goals and you're seeing a lot more mistakes happening from them. And it starts to be depending on people like Lautaro Martinez to come through for them at the end. So... that's the only thing that worries me with a packed schedule. And I can't say that for Juventus because they just don't have a packed schedule. So I don't know whether they are good enough or not. I would probably assume that they're just not because on paper, they don't have the same level of talent that Inter has. So that is something that I'm stressed about going forward for them when it comes to Champions League. But it's another trophy, 3 in a row for Inter, 5 in a row for... Is it 5 in a row? Or no, it's not in a row.
5 in total for Inzaghi.
5 in total. The man of the cups, isn't he, Simone Inzaghi?
He is, but can he win the league? That's what we're going to find out over the course of the next few months. And it's amazing to think that when we recorded this time last week, Juventus hadn't played against Sassuolo yet. Inter had gone provisionally 5 points. Well, they had gone 5 points clear. Juventus had a game in hand. And by the time that Inter next play in the league in Florence on Sunday night, Juventus will have played 3 times and could have feasibly turned a 5-point deficit into a 4-point lead. And psychologically, I think it is hard then to go out there, even if you have a game in, well, 2 games in hand, to be 4 points behind and make sure you keep winning. So we spoke about Napoli under Walter Mazzarri. He's got a short-term contract until the end of the season. The same is true of Daniele De Rossi. De Rossi, who took over from Mourinho. And now it looks like the Napoli vacancy could be filled by Mourinho next summer. How do we feel about this? We had a little bit of a Twitter poll on this via our Serie A Chronicles account. And Mourinho to Napoli, maybe, what do you think about that? That's hilarious. Lol came in at 31%. Dear God, please no came in at 17%. 37%, the majority, match made in heaven. And 15% indifferent. Wow, I don't care at all. Well, I'm certainly not part of the 15%.
It would be so fascinating to be able to put the percentages to who supports which clubs.
We need the breakdown. Absolutely.
Is the match made in heaven or just fans of other clubs who really want to see it happen?
I think that it just shows how highly rated and Mourinho is, even to this day. Yes, we've spoken about it, 26 pieces of silverware. But all across Europe, you will find people who are saying he will raise Napoli's profile. He's exactly what they need, a strong character. And it feels like people are occasionally willing to overlook some of the sort of off-the-field antics and some of the less aesthetically pleasing facets to his play in favour of this guy's box office. It's fun for a couple of years.
What a come down. What a come down from Spalletti and football that's box office. I enjoy Mourinho a lot of the time. His football is a lot less enjoyable. Him as a character, often entertaining. The football, less so.
I mean, in all honesty, it's a come down to go for Rudy Garcia, who said, "I've never watched Napoli play." I mean, I think if you're going to hire that guy, you should probably hire Mourinho. You know, he's better. But forgive me, but wasn't there a point where De Laurentiis said that he would never hire Mourinho, and Mourinho said something like, "You can't afford me," or is that like, wasn't there some whole thing between them where, like, I'm talking about 2010, like a long time ago, and he spoke about the fact that he really dislikes Mourinho, De Laurentiis, and then Mourinho said, "You know, you, as if you can afford my wages anyway, don't even think about it," sort of thing. So I'm amazed that this is the guy who's linked. Apparently, it's all to do. We have to take it with a pinch of salt because we know who his agent is, and Mendes loves to splash it around, and like loves to sort of create all this. Like, I don't know why that sounds a little bit dirty, but like.
Focus.
Okay, let's focus. But yes, a little bit like me in the draw and dressing. But yeah, it's always like, you know, everyone wants him, everyone loves him, and he also spoke about the fact that, of course, Jose Mourinho is going to be up and wanted by. I mean, let's not forget that Florentino Perez is still a huge fan of him, and the only reason why he's not back in Madrid is because everyone else isn't a huge fan of him. But he still has his admirers, and we're seeing right now a whole club is being booed, and the whole team is being booed. But I find that, I mean, when they say raising their profile, wasn't the Scudetto enough of a raising your profile? It's got to be Mourinho that comes and raises your profile. They didn't
pick on from it, did they? This infamous documentary they were going to do hasn't seen the light of day, as far as I'm aware. You know, it was supposed to be all this big. Has anyone seen that? The De Laurentiis big American documentary on Naples, the city and the club and all of that stuff. Anyway, I think you're absolutely right in that, and these things seem to go in cycles as well, though, doesn't it? Because did we expect De Laurentiis to hire Ancelotti a few years ago? I mean, if you've got the budget to hire Ancelotti, I'm pretty sure that Mourinho's wages would be something similar, and that didn't work out because of a mutiny. But actually, a lot of people look back on that time now and say, a lot of Napoli fans are a little bit rueful about that and say we didn't make the most of having Ancelotti as our head coach. It didn't work out. We gave too much power to the likes of Allen and Insigne, who are now nowhere to be seen.
Oh, Nicky, you know how I feel about Insigne. The downfall of Napoli. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, he's going, let's be honest, he's not going to be out of work for very long. He's going to end up somewhere. There are a finite number of clubs that he would wish to go to. There's a finite number of leagues that he would probably entertain offers from. We've never seen him in Germany or France. He's sort of dismissed those as one-team leagues in the past, hasn't he? I don't think he'd be averse to going to Bayern Munich or Paris Saint-Germain. PSG is always one that I think sooner or later he will coach them. But if we see him in Italy, surely, Nicky, then it's Napoli or bust. I don't see him at Milan.
Yeah, Milan would feel like too big of a betrayal, wouldn't it, of Inter? And I think maybe that, even though I'm not totally certain with Mourinho that he wouldn't, I actually wonder if Milan would even go there for the same reason. I think
really
you're right that if it was going to be somewhere in Italy, it would be Napoli. I'm a little skeptical at this one. To me, this does feel a bit like a Mendes early sort of throw that story out there. But you've made a case for why it could happen. And I don't think the financial part is a problem for De Laurentiis, especially because in my personal expectation, unfortunately, I suspect that Victor Osimhen's heading somewhere for a lot of money this summer. So there's going to be some money in the bank. And perhaps you want a manager who's got some profile to help you spend some of that money and bring someone in. And who doesn't love spending money? Jose is certainly not one who's shy about getting his employers to invest in him. So maybe. But I don't think it's the most likely outcome.
Apparently, he really wanted Bayern. And I think it has to do with his competition with like Pep Guardiola, because he totally dismissed that league before. He was like, oh my God, he's going there. Everyone can win with Bayern. I would really like to see him with Dortmund, because if he got Dortmund to win the league, then that is a real, like, that's a great thing to have. But of course, his philosophy doesn't go with Dortmund's philosophy, which is taking kids and pushing them through. I imagine
I don't think Dortmund fans would like him. I don't
No,
think Dortmund fans would buy into
And also,
what Roma fans did.
you've got Xabi Alonso at Leverkusen at the moment, haven't you? Yeah,
Leverkusen.
so it's Neverkusen, I think they were called, weren't they? It looks like they might actually win the league, and so it's one of those where it's a little bit like we had with Fernando Santos at Portugal as well. Mourinho was going to be the coach that got them a major trophy, and then Fernando Santos went and won in 2016, and now that's become less appealing.
Yeah.
You know, if suddenly a
But what about-
non-Bayern team won in the Bundesliga, then maybe restoring Dortmund to former glories is less appetizing as well.
That's true. But what about like Newcastle, which has been heavily linked to?
I'd like to see that. I'd love
Very
to see
plausible.
that. You know, big budget, and that feels like the right team for him, because it feels like, you know, not the biggest team in the country is sort of, you know, it's a bit like...
They're similar to Roma in some ways.
Yeah.
They're a club who've got an incredible
But with
local
money.
fan base, a city that loves the game, but as Mina says, with money, and who I think would embrace the underdog narrative. No one loves an underdog narrative more than Mourinho does, even when he's blatantly not the underdog. At Manchester United, he'll still tell you he's the underdog, but at somewhere like Newcastle, you can
Porto
actually
as well,
sell
I
it.
mean, which is ludicrous too, but there you go. So,
Yeah.
right.
So-
Unfortunately, there was breaking news during last night's Super Cup. It became clear over the course of the day that Gigi Riva, the all-time leading goal scorer for Italy, was unwell, and then news broke that he had died. So much so that he actually died during the match. There was a minute's silence for him at the start of the second half in the EA Sports FC Super Cup, as we must now call it. But what a legacy. I think 35 goals in 42 caps. No one scored more goals than him for Italy, which is a low number, I suppose, given just what other countries have. Several countries have players that are leading the way with 100-plus goals. But in terms of his goal per game ratio, Cagliari only ever won one league title. He was the big star of that side. This is a beloved figure in the Italian game, so much so that we saw the three sports dailies all give zero coverage to the Super Cup, and it was all about Gigi Riva. Rombo di Tuono.
It was something like 12 pages of Gazzetta dello Sport, maybe more, before you even got to 17, before you even got to Supercoppa. And the Supercoppa's, it's not small business in Italy. That would definitely be on the front page normally. So, absolutely. I mean, as Patrick's already said, Italian men's national team all-time leading scorer. He's also the player who led the way for Cagliari to become the first team south of Rome to win Serie A, first island team, unsurprisingly, I suppose, because there's not that many of those, but to win Serie A, and one of those really sort of, I think, overarching figures in Italian football, and almost perhaps more universally beloved than a lot of others, because he never went and played for one of the teams that hate each other. He never went to go and play for Juventus or Inter or Milan. And there's a whole story behind that, and about the Moratti family influence at that time with Cagliari. And perhaps if it wasn't for that, he might have gone to Juventus, who certainly were willing to try and buy him for a few years after Cagliari won the league. But I do think that in some ways has made him into this even more potent figure in Italy. But clearly the number one reason was because he had an exceptional effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, he's somebody who journalist Gianni Brera wrote about, and I feel like that's such an honor to have a great journalist talk about a great player. And he said, I baptize him Rombo di Tuono, thunderclap, one of the most extraordinary athletes ever produced by Italian football. And that is indeed who he was. described as a mythical figure, the best scorer that they've ever seen, and eternal for Sardinia. So he's somewhat of a religion. So it's sad because I do feel like every day we seem to be talking about somebody else passing away. And there are all these really extraordinary figures, people who have done amazing things for the sport. And this is a man who came second in the 1969 Ballon d'Or, third in 1970. Like, his importance is not to be underestimated, who he was. And he was behind players like Bobby Charlton. And so that is, I mean, it's a great honor, really, in all honesty. Just a really beloved figure. And it's a shame that after Franz Beckenbauer, after Gianluca Vialli, every day I feel like there's somebody new that we have to talk about passing away. But this is life.
Actually, just on influence, Mina, because he has a football school in Sardinia, and that's where Niccolò Barella got his start.
Oh my God,
And I
yeah.
did wonder whether he was going to score last night,
8 years
but
old.
it was disappointing when he got taken off. I thought that might have been a possible narrative strand, but yeah, absolutely.
That would have been nice. Yeah.
But there we go. Cagliari against Torino, a game to watch this weekend. Certainly, I think there'll be some wonderful tributes there from Unipol Domus. Before we go, delighted to say we've got a lot of shout outs this week, because we have plenty of new Chronicles Tifosi subscribers. Connor Phillip, Sunit Bajaj, I apologise if I'm butchering some of these names, Johannes Almiala, Ivan Lopez, Amrit, Aristimuno, Christopher Decker and Daniel Kelly. Thank you so much for supporting us. Thank you for tuning in. And the same goes to all of our existing listeners and our patrons as well. But I think we've pretty much touched upon everything.
I think so too. Just a reminder to Chronicles Tifosi Patreons to join the Chronicles Tifosi chat in the Patreon app. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. All links are in the show notes. We will come back this week with various voice notes from us, as always. Otherwise, our main show will be back next week. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Patrick Kendrick for hosting, and obviously Nicky Bandini. I'm Mina Rizuki. Over and out. Ciao.
Serie A Chronicles is a Serie A Chronicles production.